Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be fixing this little Sindy doll. As you can tell, she's a second generation. She has a marking C33055X in the back, which means she was most likely produced around 1977 to 1980. Her face is in pretty cute condition. Some of the paint has rubbed off, so her cheeks is not as red as they could be. Her feet are kind of damaged. It looks like they have been chewed on. She's wearing this cute little skirt and this one little long sleeve shirt that is pretty tattered. I honestly don't know if this clothes belongs to her, but you can see that there's a lot of melting in between the limbs. Her arms are made of a type of rubber, and I believe they have some kind of wiring inside that allows her to bend her arms. And same goes for her legs, but the base of her body, like her torso and her bottom section, is made out of like a more hollow like plastic, kind of like the one we see in Barbie's main body. And when these plastics come in contact, they kind of melt over time. So I'm kind of testing the range over here to see if she can move. It looks like the little plastic that binds the legs together is still okay. So I don't understand why this other leg is completely glued shut. She can't really move it. So I wonder if it was just from melting over time or whether it was a choice by the previous owner. I can also see that the shirt has really like melted into the socket of the arm, so we're gonna need our little X-Acto blade to start removing all this excess material. While we go through this process, I do want to mention that if you're not familiar with Sindy dolls, don't be shy. It's totally okay. I'm not 100% familiar with them myself. She's the very first one that's going to be joining my collection, and I was lucky to be able to score her for about 16 bucks. I know her condition's not the best, but I did want to become a little bit more familiar with the doll. I know that Sindy is like a British fashion doll that was created by the Pedigree Dolls and Toys Company in 1963, and we know that our Lady Barbie, she was produced and kind of pushed out into market in 1959. So we can see that this is a competitive brand to our Lady Barbie, but it looks like Barbie wasn't doing so hot in the UK, so Sindy went ahead and took on that position. She became a pretty popular doll in the UK, and she became pretty much the doll of the UK. As you can see here, I'm trying to separate this, but I honestly don't know how her legs are structured, since again, this is my first time being introduced to this doll, so I'm not pretty sure whether there's something else in between that holds the legs together, or whether it is fully the whole plastic, like is this leg made with 2-3 parts. I'm not quite sure, so I'll just continue digging and just to see what happens. Let's hope everything goes well. I know that like later on they try to introduce Sindy dolls here in the US, and they did change her look a little bit while she was under the license of Hasbro. It didn't go too well because, you know, we have Barbie here in the States, and Barbie's a pretty strong competitor, and she doesn't play very nice, at least not here in the market. I know there were a couple of lawsuits that were that poor Sindy doll was kind of facing, and she was not as popular as Barbie. As you can see, Sindy kind of has very childlike features, unlike Barbie. Like her face is a little rounder, she has larger cheeks and a bigger forehead that does give her a more youthful look. Well, although Barbie is supposed to be a teen, she does look a little bit older for her age. It makes me wonder if Sindy would have ever tried to go into the Japanese market. I know in Japan, they usually go for dolls that look a little bit more youthful. Since dolls are targeted for girls, for younger girls, they do want them to relate to them a little bit more by having their face structures and even body look a little bit much younger, maybe even like prepubescent. And over here, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I had gotten carried away by peeling all that material with a little X-Acto knife because it was very satisfying. Don't get me wrong. It was very satisfying. But if you're cringing, you know why. I accidentally began to cut into the joint. That means the two pieces that are joined together. And her leg was pretty much coming apart. And I had to stop regroup, and I really felt like quitting. I really felt like just putting her on the side and being, oh no, I completely destroyed her. I'm kind of done. I'm not going to do this anymore. But I made the decision to bring her into my collection. I did pick someone that's pretty damaged, and that's perfectly fine. I knew there was going to be a learning curve for restoration, and I prefer to learn this way through an item that's a little bit more damaged than one that was a little bit more salvageable. So I continued on. I was a little bit more careful, and I became a little more thoughtful and cautious about the way I approach the removal of the excess material. And after all that cutting and trimming, she was finally able to sit down. I went ahead and just kind of cleaned it up a little bit more, just so it wouldn't look so jagged, because I know I had done a little bit of a wonky job. I got carried away with the cutting, and at one point I kind of messed up. But you know what? It's okay. We take in the punches and we keep going. Let's go. And then once you actually let go of her legs and let them rest easily in the socket, it doesn't look so bad. Please understand, this is the first time I was doing this. And so I was trying my best to clean it up, to do the least damage possible, although it still got a little rough. And it's okay, she's gonna be wearing clothing at the end, and I will be keeping her in my collection. So it's alright, little lady. We are gonna get you to look so much better. Having experienced the ordeal of her bottom half, it was time to move up to the top. Her arms were not in the best condition either. There was a lot of melting going on again at the joints because of the type of material. And the shirt didn't help because the shirt was pretty synthetic. It was some kind of like plasticky synthetic material that had too melted into the joints, whether it had gotten stuck during play before storage, or whether just over time it began to disintegrate into the doll. It made it a little bit more difficult. I had to make a choice whether the shirt was going to be damaged or not. And after considering it for a sec, I knew that although we would be able to save the doll, I wouldn't have the same luck with the shirt. I went in with the X-Acto knife and tried my best to be as careful as possible to maybe be able to salvage the shirt as well. Because it is a vintage piece, or so I hope it is. It does look. I began to carefully go at the edges. I can sew it back together. I will figure out a way. And so I went slowly around the edges just to make sure that I could free it, doing the least damage as possible. I did not want to make the same mistake I had done with her legs. I was finally able to free pieces of it, and I was able to see her joint. Her joints were in pretty good condition, both the legs and the arms. The rubber sustained all this time and it survived. So I was being very careful not to cut them, but still trying to remove all the stuck material that was in there. I really did not think that the shirt would be salvageable after all that cutting. I was being as careful as possible so I could maybe repair it by having to shorten the sleeves just a bit, but it didn't seem like the shirt was gonna make it. Able to remove that sleeve, I had done a pretty big hole on it. Hopefully it can still be fixed. The arm is moving perfectly fine. The only issue was that the shirt had melted into the socket, but the everything else is fine. So the next round was just the second arm. The second arm was not as bad as the first. It only had a little bit of material that was in the bottom, like in the armpit side, and that was pretty easy to remove. I was still being very careful. I didn't want to damage anything. And the only issue with the second arm was that the socket of the arm had gone a little deeper into the socket. I made sure to move her hair out of the way and just start carefully removing the excess material again from around the arm. As I was getting closer to removal, I was getting a little bit more impatient. I was trying to pull it out of the hole because I didn't want to cut any further. I've been lucky so far. So I kept pulling and just pulling it to create tension and then cut in between because I honestly did not want to damage. That was the trickiest part because that's where the rubber connects. But once that was done, she had a little bit of green hairy armpit hair, but other than that, she is free to move. She can move her arms up and down, but now she needs a little bit of a bath. Her arms are so dirty, and so were her legs. Her eyes needed some scrubbing, and her hair was off-colored because it was so dirty. From what I learned from the seller was that she pretty much was owned by that seller and had been in storage for a long time, or at least owned by a family member of the seller. So this girlie was played with and was forgotten in storage for a very long time. I did a quick little video for before and after just to demonstrate how much dirt she actually had in her body. The lighting initially was not the best. That's why you couldn't see how extremely dirty she was. I cannot repair her foot, but I will just make sure that she's always wearing some fancy shoes so she doesn't have to show her little hurt foot. I went ahead and used the little magic eraser to remove some of those stains from her arms, and believe me, the shot actually hurt. Not because it would cause any damage to the doll, but because it eventually caused some damage to me. My phone fell directly on my foot and I got a bruise that lasted for a couple of days. But Sindy did clean up really, really well. I feel like I still could have done a little bit more work on her hair, but I'm considering rerooting her because she's missing so much hair. The majority of her hair is in the middle, but that's just the way this is designed. But she's still missing some on the sides. So I'm considering maybe buying some new hair and rerooting her. She moves just perfectly fine. Her face is pretty clean. It is missing some coloration, which we're gonna go ahead and add later on. Because her hair is so thin, I decided to make a little headband to hold it in place so it doesn't have so much pop-up on the top. I want it to be a little bit more flat so it doesn't show those bald spots under. But just look at the life that she has back on her face. She looks like she's aware of what's going on, unlike before that she looked like she was just ready to be thrown into a thrift store. So I'm really happy to be able to bring her back to life. I made sure I created like this faux headband by just kind of like tying it. I don't want to cause much damage. I did use my scene hairbrush to kind of flatten it out. It's just a temporary hairstyle while I consider whether I will be rehairing her or not. I really want to keep her with the majority of her original parts, so I might not remove her old hair. I might just add a couple of plugs in the bottom just so she's not so bold. Instead of doing this, I usually would use a bag of garlic. Garlic here in the States comes in like a little net that's very rubbery and it doesn't smell like the garlic. So I usually just put it over their head. But at this point, I really didn't have one. So I went ahead and just kind of made it look like a hostage situation with a little lady over here. But I just try to flatten down the hair without putting too much heat in it, because I know that the boiling of the hair may have helped at setting it down, but I was really afraid. I didn't know how much heat it could take, so I just kind of stayed with the lukewarm water and just kind of like pushing it down by just allowing it to dry in that shape. And while we settled her hair down, I went ahead and began to work on that shirt. Oh my goodness, this poor little shirt sure got a lot of damage as we were trying to rip it off her body. But it's not as bad as it looked. It's just a very dramatic fabric. So I went ahead and trimmed all the excess hair that made it look like it was a wild case. And I decided that I was gonna go ahead and just bring it all under control. It still kind of looks like she got mauled by a dog. Maybe that's what really happened with her little foot. So I decided to just go ahead and use my lighter to melt some of that plastic fabric, so it wouldn't shred so much. I wanted it to be a little bit more firm, a little bit more like if it was just freshly cut. So I trimmed as close as I could, and then I went in with the lighter just to melt it. Just to melt the edges so they wouldn't just shred so much and they wouldn't fall apart. And this technique actually worked pretty well. I didn't want to let it be too close to the material because I didn't want it to burn fully or to leave like an ugly residue. And I didn't want it all to just catch fire. This process was actually really easy. I got so focused into it that I forgot that the lens on my camera was really close to the lighter, so I had to test to see if it was getting heated. But it wasn't. Everything was okay. So once I finally finished melting all the excess material, I measured to see if the sleeves would look about the same, and they would. So I just went in with my needle and thread and placed them properly and just began to sew it all back together. After I finished sewing the sleeves together, I decided to start working on her face. I used some of my Copic markers just to bring back the little pink blush color to her lips. I didn't want it to be a bright red or anything like it, so an alcohol marker would give me a little bit of the light pink coloration that I wanted in her lip. I didn't want it to be a bright red. I wanted to keep her with a very natural and neutral look. It took some time, and I was slowly building up the color to the tone that I wanted. Once I turned on the flash of my camera, the white light showed you the tone of the lip a little bit more than the warm color from my lamp. Then I grabbed one of my cheap $5 store palettes to bring back that big bright pink in her cheeky cheeks. Just like the lip, I slowly built it up. I noticed that this pink was a little bit more like purplish undertone, and it kind of clashed a little bit with her lip, but I was just gonna rub it in and then slightly remove it so it just leaves a residue of the pink and it won't be that big bright one. The reason I use the real powder is because it's so strongly pigmented that it does leave that little rosy look behind even after you wipe it off. With her makeup pretty much completed, it was time to examine her wardrobe. So this is how the shirt ended up after we had to go ahead and butcher it off her arms since it had been stuck in the socket. But it actually turned out pretty good. Burning the edges helped a lot of that little material that was loose. And the skirt didn't have any issues. It does have a little hole in it, but it's really unnoticeable since it has so many pleats. And all I did was wash it and steam it. And here's the final reveal of our Sindy doll wearing her gorgeous original outfit. Not original from the doll, but originally from the Mercari listing. She still does have a couple of hair plugs missing. Her face does look a little bit brighter, and her hair does look a little bit better. But I think she has a long way to go. I love the skirt, but I'm still not in love with that shirt. So I went ahead and tried a different look on our little lady. I went ahead and borrowed one of Barbie's pink shirts, gave her a cute little pink ribbon to accentuate her hair, and covering a little bit of the midriff made it look like such a classic, cute look.